homeless guy asked me for money, and I was like, I don't have any cash. I only have credit cards. And he's like, oh, no problem. I have a Square. Do you own a business? What's the name of your business? Strap for Cash? And then he pulled out his iPhone 17, tapped my credit card for $20. And then he turned the phone to me, and he's like, he's going to ask you if you want to leave a tip.
Good morning. It's Friday, Fight Song Friday, April the 3rd, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have Varney and Company, motivation, meditation, and the Cold War. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. Now, Varney and Company starring Ashley Webster.
Right now, Ashley Webster taking over.
Hey,
Hey, good morning, Cheryl, and thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Yes, I'm Ashley Webster in for Stu Varney today, but let's begin with that latest read on the jobs report showing 178,000 jobs added in March, much higher than expected. The unemployment rate also falling unexpectedly to 4.3%. We're going to break down the numbers with Labor Secretary Chavez de Rima in about 15 minutes. The markets are closed today in observance of Good Friday, but futures will be trading until 9:15, so another 15 minutes right now across the board. The Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ down, possibly on fears that the Fed will not be cutting rates anytime soon, thanks to that strong jobs report. Let's take a look at oil, and the national average for a gallon of regular gas right now at $4.09. Well above $4. Of course, if you live in California, you're going to be paying $5.89. That's all thanks to taxes. On the show today, Iran carrying out strikes on Gulf nations overnight after the U.S. destroyed the country's tallest bridge, which opened just a few months ago. A major shakeup at the Justice Department. Pam Bondi is out and Todd Blanche is in as an interim attorney general. We'll get into that. And there are also reports that EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin is under consideration for that job. President Trump says he's going to sign an order to ensure all DHS employees are paid during the shutdown. This as TSA call-outs have dropped by more than 40% nationwide since Monday, when officers began to receive back pay. And let's look to the skies. Artemis 2 is officially headed to the moon after a test orbit around the Earth. And the White House has revealed President Trump's 2027 budget proposal. My word, we've got it all on this Friday, April the 3rd, 2026.
And that was the Webster Man, Nonprofit News Now. Back in a minute.
This is for somebody who's going through the fire right now, but you still believe. Who's fighting through blood, sweat, and tears, but you still believe. You gotta make a declaration inside of yourself. I'm better than this. I'm stronger than this. I will survive this.
Who on this earth would still be going right now? You are. You are. Some things are gonna happen that are not in your control. You're gonna get knocked around. Don't let your environment make you weak. You got to get to the point of your life where you say, I have had it. I'm not going to live like this anymore. No, there's got to be more for me. I got tired of losing. I got tired of coming up short. I got tired of eating out of trash cans. I got tired of watching everybody else graduate. I got tired. Do I just sit there and settle? No, I don't. I say enough's enough, man, and I'm going to make a change, and I'm going to keep going until I get it. You chase something that you believe you deserve until you get it. And it doesn't matter what happens to you. It doesn't matter how many times you've been fired. It doesn't matter how many people don't believe in you. You just go until you get it. You got to believe this for yourself. You got to believe I can do this. I was created for this. I was called for this. I was curved for this. I was shaped for this. I was meant for this. Wouldn't it be amazing if you believe that? Wouldn't you sleep good tonight if you believe that? Wouldn't you walk around with your head up and your back straight if you believe that? You wouldn't be intimidated by anybody, anywhere, at any time if you just believe that. Say it and actually mean it. Look in the mirror every fucking day and say, yeah, I'm proud of you. I believe in you. You can do anything you want. You are powerful. You say if it's hard, then do it hard. I won't allow this to stop me. I don't have the option of easy. I don't think you do it. Any of us do. No. All you need to do to get out in the arena of life is to say, it's possible. In spite of the no's, because maybe this next call might do it. It's possible. This next job interview, this might be the one. I don't care what it is. I don't care how many times you've had to cry yourself to sleep. I don't care how difficult it is. Don't you dare give up now. Because whatever is over you defines you. And whatever defines you limits you. You better put some strength in your back, plant your feet, square your shoulders, and stand up to it. Don't you dare sit down. Don't you dare crumble under the weight of it. Don't you dare give in because of the nature of it. Don't you dare go home and raise the white flag of surrender. This is not your season to die. This is not your season to quit. There's joy, there's peace, there's breakthrough, but you'll never see it if you don't stand up to it. And when that thing tells you to quit, you look at it in his eye and say, I ain't going nowhere. I will break you before you break me. I will break you. You will not defeat me. You will not destroy me. You can't take me. You will not break me. Sometimes in life, you have to hit back. Allow your pain to push you to greatness. I've been broken so much. I've been defeated so much. I've been disappointed so much in my life. But I know what it feels like. I can handle it. You have to resolve yourself today that you're going to win, that you're going to dominate, that you're not average and ordinary. There has to become a point where you make a decision. We're going to dominate. We're here to win. We are not here to play. And that takes some intestinal fortitude. It takes a decision. I'm where I'm at because I just flat decided at some point I get to choose who I am. The world doesn't tell me who I am. And in every family, there's the one that eventually shows up in a family. They rise up and changes the whole family forever. I'm the damn one. And in your family, you could be the one. It's you. You've got to make it your personal business to make it happen. And you've got to resolve within yourself that I'm the one. I'm the one to make this happen. I'm the one to become successful in this business. But you know it's going to be hard, but find out what will make it worth it for you. Don't cry to give up. Try to keep going. Go get your doggone stuff. And don't let nobody tell you no. Don't run from the chaos. Stand still and let the chaos run from you.
And that was meditation or motivation. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, meditation.
Crux sacra sit mihi lux, non drago sit mihi timore cedit, in domo orationis manemus, sub sino sancte crucis, ubi fides manet fortis, ibi pax descendi. Sancte benedicte, ora pro nobis, defende nos Domine per sinum sancte crucis, custodi animas nostras, Domine Iesu Christe, lux vera mundi, illumina corda fidelium, et libera nos a malo. Umbre mundi surgunt et mens turbatur, ad Dominum clamamus, et misericordia descendit, crux Domini ante nos stat, sicut murus fortis contra insidias inimici, contra voces tenebrarum. Crux sacra sit mihi lux, non draco sit mihi dux, vade retro satana, nunquam suade mihi vana, sunt mala quae libas, ipse venena bibas. Vade de refugium nostrum in generatione generationem, custodi populum tuum et protege ecclesiam tuam. Non dormit qui custodit, non dormit qui vigilat, super animas credentium lux tua permanet. Crux sacra sit mihi lux, non draco sit mihi dux, si timor cor tangitsi anima fatigatur, ad crucem respissimus et spes renascitur. Sancte benedicte, pater monacorum, esto defensor fidelium, in hora tentationi. Sancte benedicte, ora pro nobis, defende nos in pugna contra insidias inimici, contra potestates tenebrarum, Domine Iesu Christe, Salvator mundi, custodi nos in nocte, et dona pace. Sacra sit mihi lux, non draco sit mihi dux, vade retro satana, nunquam suade mihi vana, sunt mala quae libas, ipse venena biba, pro sacra sit mihi lux. Cum cor anxium est et spiritus gratur, nomen Domini invocamus et pax descendit. Sicut lumen aurore super noctem longam, gratia Dei manet super servos suo.
A fun fact about me is that I cannot leave the
And that was a little bit of meditation. Back in a minute. Thank you. They may beg, they may disappear, but in every case, they're reacting to the loss of power, not to the loss of you. And that's a painful truth that the true conservative eventually comes to terms with. The bad Democrat never respected them. They needed the supply, the attention, the reflection. And so the conservative stops being the mirror. They start being a person again, with edges, with limits, with sovereignty. They stop explaining themselves to people committed to misunderstanding them. They stop justifying their boundaries to people who never respected their absence. In doing so, they begin to reclaim their life. It doesn't happen all at once, it's a process. But each act of self-respect becomes a brick in the foundation of a new identity, one rooted not in overgiving, but in balance, not in fear, but in clarity, not in rescuing others, but in rescuing themselves. Here's a hard truth. The bad Democrat thrives on emotional reactions. They need them almost like they need air. It doesn't matter if the emotion you're offering is love, hatred, anger, or fear, as long as it's intense, as long as it's a reaction that places them at the center of your emotional world. They'll take it. They thrive on the drama. They feed on it. It's how they validate their sense of self. It's their supply. Without it, they feel invisible, irrelevant, empty. So, they create chaos, they provoke, they manipulate. They'll push every button they can. Fine, because each emotional reaction, no matter how negative, is a form of confirmation. They don't care if you're furious or adoring. They just need something. They need you to engage. And this is where the true conservative begins to learn something profound. After enough cycles of emotional exhaustion, after enough heartbreak, after doing enough of that toxic dance, the true conservative learns how not to feed the fire. It's a subtle shift, but it's the most powerful weapon in the conservative's arsenal. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the Cold War.
The year is 1978. The location is a darkened combat information center aboard a Soviet Cresta II-class cruiser. The ship is slicing through the cold, grey waters of the Baltic Sea, a steel fortress bristling with sensors and missiles. Inside, huddled in the green glow of radar scopes, a young Mitchman, a warrant officer, stares at his screen. His job is to find the Americans. To find the NATO intruders probing the maritime borders of the Warsaw Pact. His is the first line of defense. Suddenly, a contact. It is faint, barely a flicker, a single paint on the screen. It is low, impossibly low, lost in the ground clutter of the churning sea. The officer, trained to dismiss such anomalies, adjusts his filters. The contact appears again. It is moving. Fast. Not at the speed of a jet, but with a steady, determined purpose. It is heading inland, towards the coast of East Germany. He keys his microphone, his voice a strained monotone. Contact. Bearing 070. Range, 40 kilometers. Low altitude. Speed, 400 knots. The operations officer stiffens. Classification. The Mitchman hesitates. Unknown. The contact is, it is gone. Gone? What do you mean gone? Is it a technical fault? No, comrade captain. It was a hard return. It just vanished. A moment of silence hangs in the room. This is not the first time. For months, from the fog of the North Atlantic to the vast emptiness of the Pacific, Soviet radar operators, sailors, and air defense crews have been filing identical reports. They are reports of ghosts, of phantoms that appear from nowhere, fly with intelligent purpose, and then disappear from the most powerful radar screens on Earth. For the admirals in Moscow, these reports are more than a nuisance. They are an insult. This is Cold War impact. We find the technological mysteries and human dramas buried in the archives of the world's greatest standoff. If you want to understand the weapons that defined an era and the moments of shock that shifted the balance of power, subscribe to our channel. The story you are about to hear is one of the most significant. To understand the bafflement, you must first understand the pride of the Soviet Air Defense Forces, the Voiska PVO. This was not just a branch of the military, it was an ideology made manifest in steel and concrete. It was the shield of the Rodina, the motherland. It was the sacred promise that the horrors of June 1941, when Hitler's Luftwaffe had shattered the Soviet Air Force on the ground, would never happen again. And this shield was thick. By the late 1970s, the Soviet Union had built the largest, densest, and most sophisticated integrated air defense system the world had ever known. It was a terrifying, multi-layered beast. On the outermost ring, massive early warning radar arrays, the Tall King and Spoon Rest, stared deep into NATO territory, their electronic eyes sweeping the horizon. Closer in, a seemingly endless belt of surface-to-air missile sites, or SAMs. There were thousands of them. There was the S-75 Davina, the system that had famously swatted Gary Power's U-2 spy plane from the heavens. There was the S-125 Neva, optimized for lower altitude targets. And then, guarding the most critical state secrets, was the S-200 Angara. This was a monster. A telephone pole-sized missile designed to kill the fastest, highest-flying targets the Americans could build, like the SR-71 Blackbird. This missile screen was backed by the PVO's own private air force. Thousands of dedicated interceptor aircraft. The MiG-23 Flogger, with its variable sweep wings and new look-down divided by shoot-down radar, designed to find intruders hiding against the Earth. And the king of them all, the Mikoyan-Gurevich MiG-25 Foxbat. This was less an airplane, more a rocket with wings. Built of steel and titanium, it could scream upwards at over Mach 3, a missile-armed sentinel meant to intercept high-altitude American bombers before they could unleash their nuclear payloads. This entire network was bound together by hardened command bunkers, buried deep in the earth, linking radar data from the Arctic Circle to the borders of Afghanistan. It was, in the minds of Soviet marshals, impenetrable. It was a system that had been blooded in the skies over Vietnam and the deserts of the Middle East, where it had taught American pilots to fear the acronym SAM. And now, that system was reporting ghosts. The reports were maddeningly similar. A contact would appear inside the densest part of the radar coverage, not flying in, but simply materializing. It would be detected, briefly. It would be flying low, often at treetop level, or just above the waves. Too slow for a jet, too fast and too steady for a helicopter. Then, the vanishing act. The contact would track for several minutes, and then, as if a switch was thrown, it would disappear. The initial reaction from the high command was predictable. Blame the operators, the admirals and generals, men who had built their careers on the infallibility of their systems, thundered. Your operators are drunk. Your radar is faulty. You are seeing weather balloons, thermal inversions, flocks of birds. The young Mitchman on the Cresta II cruiser and his counterparts in freezing radar posts in Siberia knew better. A bird did not fly at a perfect 400 knots. A thermal inversion did not hold a steady course for 3 minutes and then vanish as it passed behind a hill. And then there was the most disturbing pattern of all, the reappearance. A radar post in East Germany would track a low-level ghost heading east. The target would vanish from the scope, just as it was programmed to do when it entered the shadow of a ridge or a small mountain. This was normal. What was not normal was for the contact to reappear 30 seconds later on the other side of the ridge, precisely on the same course at the same speed. This implied the impossible. It implied that the target knew the terrain. It implied that it wasn't just flying low to avoid radar, but that it was actively navigating the terrain. It wasn't blind. It wasn't a simple drone, like the American Ryan Firebee reconnaissance drones that Soviet clients had shot down over Vietnam. Those were crude. They flew high, or they flew in a straight line. This was something else. This was intelligent. The PVO scrambled its fighters. MiG-23 aircraft would roar off snowy runways, their pilots guided by ground controllers onto the last known vector. They would dive low, their own powerful radars blasting the empty sky. And they would find nothing. Absolutely nothing. The pilots would return fuming, their fuel wasted. They had chased phantoms. The humiliation was intense. The Soviet Union's best interceptors, the pride of the nation, were being made to look like fools by an enemy that would not even show itself. The The mystery deepened when the problem moved to the sea. Soviet naval strategy was built around the carrier problem. The US Navy's carrier battle groups were floating air bases, symbols of American power. To counter them, the Soviets had built a new generation of massive missile-heavy warships, the Kirov-class battlecruisers and the Slava-class cruisers. These ships were bristling with anti-ship missiles, designed to overwhelm an American carrier's defenses in a massive, coordinated salvo. Their entire doctrine was about looking out and looking up. Now, their own patrols were being shadowed. Submarine captains reported faint sonar contacts, whispers that were too small to be enemy submarines. Surface ships detected fleeting radar blips, disappearing into the wavetops. The admirals were more than baffled. They were afraid. If the Americans had developed a stealth aircraft, as some in the GRU, military intelligence, were beginning to whisper, it was one thing. A new bomber would still have a pilot. A pilot could be intimidated. A pilot made mistakes. A pilot had to fly high enough to see his target. But these ghosts were different. They were small. They were autonomous. And they flew with a suicidal confidence, hugging the terrain with a precision no human pilot would dare attempt. They were treating the most expensive and formidable air defense network on Earth like it was a minor inconvenience, like it wasn't even there. In Moscow, in the secret research institutes and high-level meetings of the Politburo, a cold realization was dawning. This was not a glitch. This was not a simple NATO probe. This was a technological gap. The Americans had built something that broke the rules, and the admirals, staring at their maps covered in reports of phantom contacts, had no idea what it was, where it came from, or how to stop it. They were staring at a new kind of war, one they were not prepared to fight. The reports piled up. From the rain-lashed fjords of the Kola Peninsula, home to the Northern Fleet's nuclear-armed submarines, to the volcanic fog of the Kuril Islands in the Pacific. The ghosts were everywhere. The initial confusion of the radar operators had hardened into a cold, professional dread. The Admiral's denial had curdled into red-faced fury. In a secure, windowless conference room deep beneath Moscow, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and unspoken fear. Here, the marshals of the Soviet Union, the leaders of the Navy, the PVO, and the GRU gathered to confront the impossible. It is a flaw in the American Firebee drone, insisted a general from the Air Defense Forces, jabbing a thick finger at a projected map. They are simple. They get lost in the sea clutter. Our S-200 systems are designed for high-altitude bombers, not for toys. An admiral of the Northern Fleet slammed his hand on the table. Toys that can fly 500 kilometers, navigate the valleys of the Kola, and disappear 10 kilometers from the piers of Severomorsk. Toys that make my Kirov-class cruisers. Blind? This is incompetence. You promised us a shield. A shield against bombers, the PVO general shot back. Against the B-52, against the Minuteman. Not flocks of seagulls with American electronics. Into this argument stepped a quiet man in a nondescript suit. A colonel from the GRU's technical directorate. Comrades, he said, his voice cutting through the anger. We have analyzed over 200 of these phantom incidents from the last 18 months. He signaled for a new slide. It showed a map of East Germany. On it were dozens of thin, red lines, the tracks of the ghosts. At first they appear random, the GRU colonel continued. They appear at different times from different directions, but they are not random. He overlaid another slide. A detailed topographical map. The red lines snapped into focus. The contacts are not avoiding radar, he said. And the room went silent. They are following terrain. They are using valleys, riverbeds, and the shadows of ridges. They are navigating. Every single one of these routes is a pre-planned, optimized corridor through our densest S-75 and S-125 missile belts, the contacts that vanish over the Baltic. They are doing so when they drop below the curvature of the Earth, precisely where our shipborne radars lose them. A sickness settled in the room. This was not a glitch. This was not a toy. This was an intelligence operation of breathtaking arrogance. The colonel continued. The reappearance that our comrades in the PVO have reported, that is the most informative piece of data. The contact vanishes behind a hill. Our ground radar, which is line of sight, loses it. Then, 20, 30, 60 seconds later, it reappears, precisely where it should be if it had continued on its path without the radar guiding it. This means two things. One, it is not a remotely piloted drone. The data link would be impossible to maintain at that altitude. 2, it has its own brain. It is navigating autonomously. It carries a map inside its head, a map of our territory. And it compares that map to the terrain it sees. The PVO general was pale. That's science fiction. That is Zvezdny Vojny, Star Wars. The computing power, the GRU colonel interrupted, is precisely the problem. Our agents in the West report the Americans are obsessed with something they call microprocessors, chips, computers the size of a fingernail. We have dismissed them as novelties for hobbyists. We were wrong. The mystery had changed. The question was no longer, what is this thing? The question was, how does it know? How does it see? The Soviet response was massive, desperate, and utterly futile. They tried to plug the gap. They rushed new radar systems into service, the tall rack and thin-skin mobile radars designed to be moved quickly to cover low-altitude gaps. The ghosts simply flew around them. They tried to look down. The new MiG-30, one Foxhound interceptor, a massive improvement on the Foxbat, was rushed to frontline units. It had a revolutionary Zaslon phased array radar, the first of its kind, powerful enough to burn through, jamming and find targets hiding against the ground. The MiG-31 pilots would lock onto a contact, a small, slow-moving blip at 500 feet. They would get a launch tone, and as they prepared to fire their massive R-33 missiles, the target would vanish. Not a slow fade, not a confusing blob of chaff, just gone. Why? Because the ghost knew it was being painted by radar. It felt the electronic touch of the Zaslon, and in its tiny silicon brain, a calculation was made. And it would drop, from 500 feet to 100. From 100 feet to 50, it would drop so low, it would merge with the reflection of the Earth itself, becoming invisible. The admirals, in their terror, fell back on what they knew: mass. They ordered their ships to sail in tighter formations, their radars overlapping, creating a net of electronic energy. It made no difference. The ghosts would appear inside the formation, detected by a Krivak frigate for 90 seconds, then vanishing before the flagship Slava could even train its weapons. This was more than a failure of technology. It was a failure of imagination. The entire Soviet military doctrine was built on the concept of the main battle. A massive clash of tanks in the Fulda Gap, a sky darkened by strategic bombers, a sea battle of dueling carrier groups. It was a war of scale, of norms and salvos and fronts. The Americans, it seemed, had decided not to play. They had created a weapon that ignored the front, a weapon that could sneak around the battle, a weapon that did not need a $100 million bomber or a 3,000-man aircraft carrier to launch it. A weapon that could, theoretically, be launched from a small truck in a German forest, or a submerged submarine, or a simple B-52 flying safely over the North Sea. A weapon that could appear from nowhere, fly hundreds of miles undetected, and deliver a nuclear warhead, not to a city, but to the specific ventilation shaft of the command bunker in which the admirals were currently sitting. This was the true horror. The ghosts were not just contacts, they were messengers. They were the digital fingerprints of an invisible enemy. An enemy that had already mapped every hill, every valley, and every radar blind spot. The shield was a lie. The motherland was not defended. The admirals were not baffled. They were naked. And they were waiting for the other shoe to drop. Thousands of miles from the grey Baltic and the paranoid bunkers of Moscow, the sun beats down on the alkali flats of the White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico. The year is 1977. The air is crystal clear. The sky a painful, empty blue. There are no massive gantries here, no roaring 10-story rockets, no fleet of interceptors. Instead, a group of engineers in short-sleeved shirts and sunglasses stand near a set of trailers, sipping coffee. They are watching a single modified A-6 Intruder aircraft. Tucked under its wing is a sleek, white cylinder. It looks less like a weapon of war and more like a piece of industrial plumbing. It is just over 20 feet long and only 20 inches in diameter. It has no pilot, it has no rocket motor, only a small, simple turbofan engine, a Williams F-107. The same kind of engine one might find on a small private aircraft. The A-6 banks, and the cylinder drops. For a moment, it falls. Then, two small wings deploy from its sides. A moment later, the turbofan engine ignites with a quiet, high-pitched whir. It does not scream upwards. It does not accelerate to Mach 3. It descend. It drops until it is just 100 feet above the desert scrub. Then, traveling at a steady 550 miles per hour, the speed of a 1950s airliner, it levels off. And it begins to think, this is the BGM-109, the Tomahawk land attack missile. It is the ghost. And the brain the GRU colonel in Moscow was terrified of, the map inside its head, it was codenamed TERCOM, Terrain Contour Matching. It was a revolution, a genuine eureka moment in military history, as profound as the invention of the machine gun or the atomic bomb. And it worked on a principle of genius-level simplicity. The Tomahawk did not see the world in the way a human pilot does. It had no cameras. It had no laser-guided eye. It did not in fact care about what was on the ground, the trees, the buildings, the roads. It cared only about the shape of the earth underneath it. Inside its slim, white body, a simple, downward-looking radar altimeter was constantly measuring a single number, its exact height above the ground. At the same time, its flight computer was reading a pre-loaded digital map. But this was no ordinary map. It was not a map of cities and borders. It was a map of altitude. A series of pre-planned corridors, each one only a few miles wide, but hundreds of miles long, had been meticulously charted by American intelligence. These maps were the product of years of patient, invisible work. They were built from the gigabytes of data flooding in from reconnaissance satellites. They were built from the thousands of radar images taken by SR-71 Blackbird spy planes, flying at 80,000 feet on the edge of Soviet airspace, their powerful side-looking radar peering deep into the motherland. The Soviets, in their paranoia, had built a shield against bombers. They had no shield against cartographers. As the Tomahawk missile flew, it was in a constant state of comparison. Its flight computer was essentially asking itself one question, 10 times every second. The ground I am measuring, does it match the ground I expected? It would fly over a small ridge. Its radar altimeter would report a sudden decrease in altitude. The computer would check its stored map. Yes, a ridge was expected here. I am on course. It would fly over a river valley. The altimeter would report a sudden increase in altitude. Yes, a valley was expected. I am on course. If the measured terrain did not match the stored map, the missile knew it was drifting. It would make a tiny, precise correction to its fins. A 1-degree turn to the left. A half-degree turn to the right. It was constantly, minutely, feeling its way along a pre-programmed digital path. This is why it baffled the Soviet radar operators. It was navigating the terrain. It was using valleys and ridges as cover, because its digital corridor had been designed to do exactly that. The American mission planners, sitting in a comfortable office in Omaha, could plot a course that flew a Tomahawk missile directly between two Soviet S-75 missile sites, deep in their radar blind spot. And this is why the contacts would reappear. The missile did not need an external signal. It did not need GPS, which did not exist yet. It did not need a pilot. It was a self-contained, autonomous, terrain-following robot. When it vanished behind a hill from a Soviet radar's line of sight, the missile did not care. It was not blind. It was simply following its map. When it emerged on the other side, it was precisely where it was supposed to be. The vanishing act that so infuriated the MiG-31 pilots was another layer of its genius. The missile systems could listen. When its sensors heard the electronic scream of an interceptor's radar, the Tomahawk's computer was programmed with a simple, evasive maneuver. Go lower. It would drop from 100 feet to 30. It would hug the contours of the earth with a precision no human pilot would ever dare, not at 500 miles per hour. It would simply sink into the ground clutter, the electronic noise and reflection from the earth itself, and become, to the powerful Zaslon radar of the Foxhound, invisible. The MiG pilot, flying at 20,000 feet, was trying to shoot a ghost. The Tomahawk by then was flying under him, under his radar, under his entire philosophy of air combat. And then there was the final, terrifying piece of the puzzle, the payload. The Tomahawk was not just an intelligence-gathering drone. This was not a test. This was a weapon. Tucked into its nose was one of the most sophisticated pieces of engineering of the entire Cold War, the W-80 nuclear warhead. This was not a city-busting, multi-megaton monster. It was small. It was finesse. It had a dial-a-yield capability, allowing its operators to choose the explosive power from 5 kilotons up to 150 kilotons, 10 times the power of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. This weapon, this ghost, was not designed to carpet bomb cities. It was designed to decapitate. The Americans had built a weapon that could be launched from an invisible submarine lurking in the Norwegian Sea, or from a simple armored box launcher bolted to the deck of a destroyer, or even from a truck hidden in the Black Forest. This weapon could fly 1,500 miles. It could cross the whole of Eastern Europe, navigating by terrain, invisible to the densest air defense network on Earth. It could fly to Moscow. It could fly down a specific street. And with its final terminal guidance system, it could deliver a nuclear warhead, not to the city, but to the front door of the Kremlin, to the Ministry of Defense, to the precise coordinates of the windowless, smoke-filled bunker where the baffled admirals were sitting. This was the American advantage. This was the core of the dominance. The Soviet Union had spent its entire national treasure building a massive, thick, iron shield. The Americans had just built a key. A skeleton key, made of silicon and software, that could pick any lock anywhere on Earth, without ever being seen. The truth did not arrive in a single dramatic moment. It seeped into the Soviet system like a slow-acting poison, carried in the microfiches of spies, the whispers of defectors, and the cold, hard analysis of the GRU's technical institutes. By the early 1980s, the codename Tomahawk was no longer a mystery. It was a nightmare. GRU agents, at immense risk, had managed to acquire unclassified and low-level classified documents from American defense contractors. They stole technical journals. They debriefed sympathetic Western peace activists who had protested outside the gates of General Dynamics. When the pieces were assembled in Moscow, the picture was horrifying. The Ghosts had not been a stealth aircraft. They had not been a new kind of spy plane. They were small, cheap, mass-produced, and expendable. The admirals in the smoke-filled room had been wrong. The Americans were not testing their defenses. They were not probing. They were mapping. The implications of Turcom terrain contour matching were a strategic catastrophe. It meant that to launch a Tomahawk, the Americans needed a map, and to get a map, they needed to fly reconnaissance. The SR-71 Blackbird flights, the satellite passes, and yes, perhaps even the Ghosts themselves. They had been the cartographers. The Soviet Union's most secret terrain, the hidden valleys leading to their submarine pens, the topography around their leadership bunkers, the blind spots in their radar coverage. All of it was already sitting on a digital file in some air-conditioned bunker in Nebraska. The Americans hadn't just built a weapon, they had stolen the battlefield. The Soviet response was a convulsion, a massive, panicked, and ruinously expensive attempt to rebuild the entire shield of the motherland from the ground up. It was a failure before it even began. First, they tried to see. The High Command screamed for a weapon that could look down. This was the genesis of the MiG-31 Foxhound and the new agile Sukhoi Su-27 flanker. These were magnificent aircraft, some of the finest interceptors ever built. They were equipped with new generation radars designed to find small targets hiding against the Earth. It did not matter. A Tomahawk missile is 20 feet long, and Su-27 flanker is 72 feet long. The Soviets were spending 100 million rubles on a fighter, burning thousands of kilograms of fuel per hour, to hunt a target that cost less than a single T-72 tank. Even if a flanker pilot did get a lucky radar lock, the Tomahawk would just drop. It would sink to the level of the treetops, forcing the multi-million ruble jet to follow it into a suicidal low-level chase. The economics of the exchange were insane. The Americans could build 10,000 Tomahawk missiles for the price of the Air Force required to maybe stop a few hundred of them. Second, they tried to defend. The PVO, humiliated, rushed their most ambitious project into service, the S-300, known to NATO as the SA-10 Grumble. This was a quantum leap. Unlike the old S-75, the S-300 was mobile. It was digital. It had phased array radar. It was specifically designed to shoot down low-flying cruise missiles. On paper, it was the perfect Tomahawk killer. But the Soviet Union was not a technical diagram. It was a landmass, a continent. It covered 11 time zones. To defend the motherland, the Soviets would need to deploy an S-300 battery every 50 miles. From the Baltic to the Pacific, from the Arctic to the Afghan border. It was economically impossible. So they defended what they could. Moscow, the leadership bunkers, the ICBM fields, the main naval bases. And the Americans, now possessing a map of those S-300 batteries, simply programmed their Tomahawk missiles to fly around them. The final, most desperate response came from the admirals. The Tomahawk had turned their mighty Kirov and Slava-class cruisers into the most expensive targets on Earth. Their entire doctrine, the salvo of massive anti-ship missiles, was obsolete. They were dinosaurs waiting for the Ice Age. In a panic, they began to weld new last-ditch defenses onto their ships. This was the Kortik and Kashtan system, a hybrid of small missiles and rotary cannon. It was a close-in weapon system, or CIWS. It was a wall of steel, a machine gun firing 30mm shells at 9,000 rounds per minute, designed to shred an incoming missile in the final 2 seconds before it hit the ship. Think of the psychology. The admirals had conceded the battle. They were no longer trying to defend the seas. They were no longer trying to find the enemy. They were simply huddled on the decks of their own ships, cowering under a last-ditch umbrella, praying that a hail of bullets would save them from an invisible enemy that had been launched hours ago from a submarine they never even knew was there. The Soviet High Command was defeated. Not by a war, but by a piece of software. They were trapped in a technological arms race where the rules had been rewritten. They were building a thicker, taller, heavier stone wall, while the Americans were simply walking through it, a ghost in the machine. The true impact of the Tomahawk missile was not measured in ships sunk or bunkers destroyed. It was not a weapon that won the Cold War in a fiery battle. It was a weapon that ended it, by bankrupting the ideological challenge that had sustained it. The Soviet Union's final, desperate convulsion, the attempt to build a shield against the ghosts, was one of the last nails in its coffin. The killer statistic is this. By the mid-1980s, at the absolute peak of its military spending, the Soviet Union was dedicating an estimated 25% of its entire gross domestic product to defense. A quarter of every ruble, every barrel of oil, every ton of steel, every hour of labor was being fed into the vast, hungry machine of the military-industrial complex. And that machine was failing. The MiG-31, the Su-27, the S-300 system, these were not just responses to the Tomahawk and its airborne cousin, the ALCM, Air-Launched Cruise Missile. They were direct answers. They were ruinously expensive, technologically complex, and hopelessly specific programs designed to solve a single problem, the low-flying, autonomous, invisible invader. The Americans had presented the Soviet High Command with a checkmate scenario, a strategic fork. To defend their vast land borders, they needed to deploy thousands of S-300 batteries. They could not afford to. To defend their skies, they needed to keep thousands of MiG-31 and Su-27 interceptors on constant 24-hour alert, burning fuel at a fantastic rate. They could not afford to. To defend their fleet, they had to concede that their massive ocean-going cruisers were now just defensive point targets, obsolete before they had ever fired a shot in anger. The Tomahawk had turned the Soviet Union's greatest strength, its immense size, into its single greatest vulnerability. The admirals in their bunkers, who had once dreamed of dominating the world's oceans, were now reduced to a pathetic, bureaucratic task, prioritizing what to defend. Could they save the Northern Fleet's submarine pens? Yes. But not the Black Sea Fleet's anchorages. Could they protect the Kremlin and the leadership bunkers in Moscow? Yes. But not the industrial cities of the Urals. Could they shield their ICBM silos? Yes. But not the rail lines, the power stations, or the command and control nodes that supported them. It was a war of 1,000 pinpricks, and the Soviet bear was bleeding to death from every single one before a shot had even been fired. The Soviet Union had built an army to fight World War II all over again. The Americans had built a weapon that made that army, and the very ground it stood on, completely irrelevant. When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, it was not because of a tank battle. It was because the system behind it had been hollowed out. It had been defeated by an idea that a $1 million missile, with a map in its head, was more powerful than a 500,000-man army. The final, chilling epilogue of the Tomahawk story has nothing to do with the admirals in Moscow. It has to do with us. The Tomahawk was the first weapon that truly perfected war. For all of history, warfare had been a human endeavor. It was defined by human limitations, human emotion, and human risk. A bomber pilot, no matter how brave, could be deterred by fear. He could be confused by bad weather. He could be fooled by camouflage. He could, at the last second, feel a pang of conscience and refuse to drop his payload. The tomahawk felt nothing. It was the first true weapon of the Silicon Age. It was not a smart bomb. It was a sentient one, in the only way that mattered. It was a robot built for a single, irreversible purpose. It could not be intimidated. It did not care about flak, or missiles, or interceptors. It did not feel fear. It did not feel pity. It did not feel anything. It simply followed its map. When the world finally saw the Tomahawk in action during the Gulf War in 1991, the footage was sterile. A green-tinted, night vision video of a building. A small, grey shape streaks in from the side. A silent flash. The building is gone. There was no blood. There was no chaos. There was no pilot returning to an aircraft carrier, his face etched with the strain of combat. There was only the result. The baffled Soviet admirals had been staring into the future. They were the last generation of warriors to confront an enemy they could imagine defeating. They were afraid of a ghost, a phantom on a radar screen. We today are the heirs to that phantom. We live in a world defined by its logic. A world of autonomous drones, of cyber attacks, of weapons that can cross the globe in an instant, guided not by men, but by lines of code and the cold, precise contours of a digital map.
And that was the Cold War. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that you're not neutral and that the government has no rights.